The barn doors slammed shut behind them. 12 Japanese women, dirty, exhausted, silent, stood blinking in the sun-scorched dark, their eyes adjusting to the dust and musk of hay and sweat. They had expected shackles, cells, bayonets. Instead, they found cowboys with calloused hands and dirt on their boots, laughing. Not at them, at something else. A joke, a card game, the easy rhythm of a life untouched by total war. One woman flinched, another clenched her fists. The sound was too casual, too free. Their commanders had warned them about this. Don't let them see you cry, don't let them see you beg, and above all, don't let them see you laugh. Because laughter meant erosion, and erosion meant forgetting who the enemy was. But the real shock wasn't the music or the banjos. It came later, after one woman broke the rule. And what the cowboys did next? It wasn't cruelty, it wasn't kindness, it was something far stranger. The barn swallowed the women whole the moment the doors groaned shut behind them. The air inside was thick and warm, heavy with the smell of manure, old hay, rusted iron, and something sour that clung to the back of the throat. Their boots sank slightly into the dirt floor with each step, the sound dull and muffled, as if the building itself refused to echo their arrival. Dust floated in thin beams of light, slipping through cracks in the wood, catching on their hair and eyelashes. The women stopped moving, not because they were told to, but because their bodies simply didn't know where to go next. Along the far wall, men stood in denim and canvas, sleeves rolled, hats tipped low. Their boots were caked with dried mud. Leather belts creaked when they shifted. One of them laughed, short, careless, and the sound snapped through the air like a snapped twig. Several of the women flinched at once, shoulders tightening, eyes dropping to the ground. The smell was overwhelming. Not rot exactly. Animal heat, oil, old grain, sweat soaked deep into wood. It clung to the inside of the nose. One woman lifted her sleeve and pressed it to her mouth, breathing through fabric already damp from the long ride. Another curled her toes inside thin shoes, trying not to think about what they were standing in. A cowboy stepped forward, his boot heels striking a loose board. It cracked loudly. Several of the women recoiled. He stopped, raised a hand in a half gesture that might have meant apology, might have meant nothing at all. When he turned, something slipped from his pocket and fluttered to the dirt. The sound was soft. Almost nothing. A thin rectangle landed near the edge of the light, spinning once before settling face up in the dust. A playing card. Its edges were frayed, the corners bent. Red and black ink glared against the brown floor like something alive. A joker stared up, mouth split in a grin too wide to be friendly, bells tipped with dots of faded yellow. No one moved. The man didn't notice. He kept walking, boots thudding away, the others following him toward the far door. The women remained where they were, eyes fixed on the card as if it might suddenly leap. The air pressed heavier. One woman shifted her weight. The faint rasp of her shoe against dirt sounded far too loud. She stopped. Her gaze stayed locked on the card. It lay between her and the door, a thin sliver of color in a world of brown and gray. A smell drifted up, ink and old paper, dry and dusty. It cut through the barn's stench like a foreign note. Her fingers twitched at her side. She did not bend down, not yet. Another woman beside her inhaled sharply, a quick breath through her teeth, then stilled. No one spoke. No one dared look away. The joker's painted eyes seemed to grin wider in the shifting light. A boot scuffed behind them. Someone coughed. The sound echoed too loudly, then vanished. Slowly, carefully, the woman nearest the card crouched. Her knees creaked. The hem of her uniform brushed the dirt. She reached out, 2 fingers extended, as if the thing might sting. When her skin touched the card, the paper was cooler than expected, slightly rough, the surface nicked from use. It did not move on its own. It did not bite. She lifted it. Dust clung to the corner. The grin on the card tilted sideways in her hand. She turned it over once, then again, studying the worn edges, the faded ink, the way someone had bent it before and straightened it again. Her thumb rubbed across the face, smearing a streak of brown over the white. The barn was silent except for the slow breathing of the women and the distant lowing of cattle. She did not smile. She did not speak. She closed her fingers around the card and held it to her chest, the paper crinkling softly beneath her grip. Behind her, unseen, a cowboy paused at the door. He looked back once, then looked away. And in the dim light of the barn, the first thing that changed was not a rule or a command, but the weight of a single, ordinary card resting warm in a trembling hand. The mess hall door banged open before dawn. Steam billowed out, thick with the smell of beans, grease, and black coffee left too long on a wood-burning stove. The women stood stiffly in line, their uniforms hanging loose from thin frames, hands clenched at their sides. A cowboy stood by the door with a clipboard and a piece of chalk, ticking names on a board as each woman entered. His eyes didn't linger. They never did. Inside, the air was a stew of heat and smoke. Tin trays clattered onto long wooden tables. The stew was salty, brown, ladled from a dented metal pot. Cornbread squares, dense and gritty, were dropped onto trays like bricks. Black coffee sloshed into chipped mugs. One woman flinched as it splashed near her fingers, hissing on the metal. Across the room, 4 cowboys sat at a corner table. Cards snapped against the tabletop. The sound was sharp, like the crack of dry branches. A pile of poker chips clicked in rhythm. One man leaned back, chewing a toothpick, then laughed, a sudden, chest-deep noise that boomed too loud for the space. Several women tensed. The woman who had picked up the joker sat rigid, her spoon hovering over her stew. Her eyes flicked toward the laughter, then down again. The scent of onions and beef swirled with the bitterness of overbrewed coffee. She dipped her spoon and brought it to her lips, hand trembling. The metal was warm, and the stew thickened on her tongue. Too salty, too rich. Across from her, a younger woman hesitated before tasting hers. Her fingers were wrapped so tightly around the handle of the mug that her knuckles had gone white. Another burst of laughter erupted. This time, a hand slapped the poker table hard. The sound cracked like a gunshot. The woman's spoon slipped from her fingers and clanged onto her tray. She coughed, sputtered, then gagged, her back hunched over as she tried to breathe. A fellow prisoner reached across the table and patted her between the shoulders, once, then again. The woman's face had gone red. Tears welled in her eyes, not from pain, but from confusion. Her breath came in shallow gasps, pulling in air heavy with smoke and sweat. The cowboys didn't notice. One flicked his wrist and sent a card spinning across the table. The Queen of Diamonds. It caught a draft and fluttered off the table, skimming the floor near the women's feet. The joker woman didn't move. She stared at her tray, lips tight, jaw rigid. The younger woman wiped her mouth with the sleeve of her uniform. Her stew was cold now. But she forced another bite between her teeth, chewing slow, swallowing with effort. The clack of poker chips grew louder again. A cowboy grinned as he pushed a stack into the center of the table. The chips made a dry, snapping sound as they slid together. The noise cut through everything. The joker woman reached down beneath the bench and touched her boot. The Joker card was still there, tucked deep against her ankle. The paper had softened from the heat of her skin. The edges curled. Ink had smudged faintly where her fingers had held it too long. She could feel the ridged edge pressing into her sock. It didn't hurt. It reminded her she was still holding something no one else had noticed. A siren of silence held around the table as one of the cowboys lost the hand. He slammed his palm down, muttering. Another roar of laughter followed. This time the women did not flinch as hard. Not all of them. But the Joker woman stood up early, tray in hand, food only half eaten. She stepped past the corner where the Cowboys played, and her foot brushed a face-down card on the floor. She kept walking. Outside, the wind scraped dry dust along the steps. She stood for a moment, breathing in the cooler air. Sweat dampened the back of her collar. Then, bending slightly, she reached into her boot and pressed the Joker deeper, flattening it against her skin. The paper stuck, damp and warm. She did not look back at the laughter behind her. She only stared forward. The card stayed hidden. For now. But the porch did not hide. It was always there. Same time, same sound, same slow drag of a chair leg over the warped wood as the Cowboys settled into their morning game. The bunkhouse faced the rising sun, and every day that light bled gold across the deck before the boots hit the planks. By the time the women lined up for work assignments, the cards were already out, scattered in lazy fans on a rough pine table. A rusted coffee pot steamed beside it. One of the men would pour a cup, deal a hand, then laugh like nothing outside the ranch existed. The rhythm never changed. Chair scrape, card snap, laugh, sip, repeat, laundry, stables, coop, fence post, repair. Every morning a soldier-turned washerwoman passed by that table with a bundle of sweat-stained shirts pressed to her chest. The cotton clung damp to her collarbone. Her eyes never met theirs, but she saw the cards, always face up, always mid-hand, jacks and fives, kings and threes, two aces stacked crooked like teeth. Her footsteps quickened without fail as she passed. The stable girl moved slower. She lingered when the cards flipped fast, her eyes tracing the red diamonds and black clubs. She wiped her hands on her thighs before entering the barn. Hay dust stuck to her palms like pollen. And still, the sound of the game never stopped. Even when clouds rolled in, even when the wind lashed grit through the yards, the Cowboys played. Their boots braced the porch rail, their laughter echoing off the tin roof. Even the rain, when it came, didn't silence the shuffle of the deck beneath the roof's rusted overhang. One morning, after a night thick with thunder and wind, the laundry girl found a Joker card stuck to the barn door. The paper was wet, curling along the edges. Its ink had bled slightly, but the face remained, grinning wide, chin tilted as if in mid-joke. She stared at it without touching it. The card fluttered once in the breeze, then clung again to the wood with a soft slap. A second later, the wind tore it loose, and it spiraled to the ground. She stepped over it and kept walking. Later that day, another woman found a Joker tucked inside her laundry crate, dry this time, crisp. It was folded once, clean across the middle, no note, no name. By the end of the week, 5 women had seen the Joker appear in places it shouldn't have been, under a cup, inside a boot, wedged between the slats of a latrine door. No one admitted to touching it. At night, the whispers started. "Is it a trick?" one murmured, eyes fixed on her spoon as it scraped the bottom of her tin bowl. "A test?" "They're watching," another replied, voice barely audible. "They want us to pick it up, see who breaks first." "The Joker means something," a third said, clutching her blanket tighter. "It's not a game." The cards stayed on the table. The laughter never broke pattern. One cowboy whistled the same off-key tune each morning while he shuffled, thumb flicking the deck with practiced indifference. The joker woman, now working the fence post line, found herself walking slower past the porch. She glanced once, just once. A red card glared back from the top of the pile. Her boot heels scuffed the gravel as she turned back to her task, the wood beam heavy across her shoulder. She didn't tell anyone, but that night, back in the barn, she slid the hidden joker from her boot. The card was soft now, worn from days against her skin. She turned it over in her fingers, back, then front, then back again. The face stared up, lips curled, bells dancing on the tips of its hat. She folded it in half, then again, then tucked it under the straw mat where she slept. In the bunkhouse, laughter rose again, sharp, unbothered, unbreaking, and in the darkness of the barn, 12 hands lay folded, motionless, listening. The sun was already hanging high when the feeding hour began. Heat swelled off the earth in waves, warping the air above the dust like glass. Chickens scattered around the yard, feathers clotted with sweat-soaked straw, their clucks sharp and irregular. A canvas sack sagged in the arms of one woman as she moved through the enclosure, trailing cracked feed like crumbs across a battlefield. Her bare forearms shimmered with sweat, thin veins visible beneath skin stretched too tight. The coop's tin roof sizzled in the heat. With every step, her boots crunched on the dry ground, grinding bits of shell and broken feed into powder. The air was thick, thicker than it had been the day before, and smelled of ammonia, feathers, and rust. Flies buzzed low around her ankles, the sound almost too soft to hear beneath the ringing in her ears. She paused, pressing a hand to the post beside the coop door, and blinked. The chickens twisted in her vision, doubling, then blurring. She dropped the bag. It landed with a soft thump and a cloud of golden dust, and then the coop spun sideways. Her knees hit first, then her shoulder. The heat swallowed the rest of her fall. A hen flapped its wings beside her face, and then all sound fell away. When she woke, the world was cool. The smell of hay was cleaner here. Softer, somewhere nearby, a stove ticked with cooling metal. The cot beneath her creaked when she shifted, a wool blanket scratchy against her neck. Her throat was sandpaper. Someone had removed her boots. Her toes curled unconsciously against the cotton sheet. She rolled her head to the side. There, resting neatly on the small table beside her cot, was a playing card. Not the joker. This one was clean, dry, flat. The Queen of Hearts. The red was sharp, too sharp. It glowed under the barn's filtered light, the curves of the heart rich and full, almost wet-looking, like blood caught mid-pulse. Her eyes twitched, unable to pull away. The Queen's face tilted gently, a slight smile beneath the crown. The edge of the card brushed the rim of a tin cup filled halfway with water. A shadow moved. Boots scuffed the wooden floor. Dust shifted. A cowboy appeared at the side of the cot, his shirt sleeves rolled high, forearms browned and scarred. He didn't speak. He knelt beside the bed, picked up the cup, and held it out. She sat up slowly, arms trembling with the effort. Her fingers curled around the cup's rim, knuckles pale. The metal was cool. She drank in small gulps, water trickling down her chin. When she finished, the man took the cup back, pointed once at the card, then stood and walked away. The Queen of Hearts remained. She reached out. Her fingertips brushed the paper. It was smoother than the joker, less worn. The edges still bit slightly, not softened by time or sweat. She picked it up. It bent just slightly between her fingers. That night, back in the barn, her boots freshly tied, her skin still clammy with the memory of fever, she laid down on the hay with a strange weight in her chest. Her hands trembled as she reached beneath her straw mat. The joker was still there, but it had changed. The crease now ran dead through its center, neat, deliberate, like someone had folded it with care and force in equal measure. The face was slightly distorted, the eyes seemed smaller, the grin tilted. She held it up to the moonlight slicing through the barn's high slats. One card for the blood in her chest, one for the split that wouldn't heal. She didn't know who left it, but she didn't put it back. Not yet. The next evening, the porch smelled of tobacco and dust. Cigarette smoke hung low in the air, drifting between crooked beams and curling into the rafters like it belonged there. The table was set up again. Same deck, same laughter, same metallic clink of chips tossed into a pile without ceremony. But this time, the cowboy with the red kerchief stepped away from the group and walked across the yard toward the barn. He didn't knock, just leaned in, thumb hooked behind his belt, and tipped his head. "Watch?" he asked, the word slurred and slow, like it weighed more than usual. None of the women answered. Most kept their heads down, folding worn blankets or sweeping loose straw into piles. A few shifted, barely perceptible movements of shoulders and knees. Only one stood. She wiped her palms on her skirt and followed him. The boards of the porch groaned under her bare feet. The wood was warm from the day's sun, and the air buzzed with the sharp scent of whiskey and the faint tang of iron from the chipped poker chips. She stood at the edge of the game, eyes fixed on the cards, hands clasped behind her back. They didn't make room for her. They didn't explain. But they didn't stop playing either. She watched. The man with the scar on his knuckle flicked cards across the table with mechanical precision. His thumb tapped each one twice before letting it go. They fanned across the boards with a practiced hiss. 2 kings, 1 ace, a 10. The players grunted, exchanged glances, fingers twitching toward stacks of chips. The woman stood still, tracking the flow of the cards like they were pieces on a go board. Patterns emerged: pair, bluff, raise. The cowboy in the corner with the chipped tooth tapped his boot every time he had a good hand. Another scratched his ear before folding. Then it happened. The dealer moved his hand too fast. Just once. The second card came off the bottom of the deck. Barely visible, but enough. The scarred knuckle twitched. She blinked, but said nothing. The chips piled higher. The laughter got louder. Then a gust of wind lifted a corner of the deck and spun a single card off the table. It landed face up near her feet. The joker. Its crease was still there, running like a scar down the center. She looked at it, let the silence stretch, then stepped around it. She didn't pick it up. Later that night, back in the barn, she crouched in the corner beneath the high rafters, her fingers scraped through the dirt, pulling tiny stones into a neat circle on the floor, 12 white ones, 5 darker. She dragged a stick through the dust, marking imaginary cards: a king, a queen, a jack, symbols etched with quick, deliberate cuts. A flat chip of broken wood served as the dealer's hand. She mimicked the flick. Thumb, thumb, release. Again. Then again. The rhythm was slower, but the motion sharp. She repeated the pattern until her wrist ached. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. The joker was still outside, somewhere in the dirt. But now, inside the barn, she had something else. Not the card. The game. The next night came quiet, with no wind to stir the dust, and no clouds to hide the stars. The barn lights flickered low, barely reaching past the doors, but the porch glowed as always, warm yellow spilling out from the windows like candlelight on water. She stood just outside the mess hall, arms folded tight against her ribs, listening to the sounds through the open door. Cards slapping wood, chips clinking, boots shifting. The red kerchief cowboy leaned back in his chair, caught her eye, and jerked his chin. "Sit," he said. Just one word, simple, not a request. Her steps were slow across the porch, the boards creaking under bare soles. She stopped at the edge of the table where the deck lay in a loose pile, some cards bent slightly at the corners, one with a faded blue back, the others sharp white. Another chair scraped back. An empty seat. She lowered herself into it. The wood was warm. Her knees knocked once under the table. One cowboy handed her a stack of 6 cards, face down. Another pushed a neat line of poker chips toward her corner, white, red, one blue. Her hands hovered. The paper felt slick, cool even in the heat. Her fingertips trembled slightly as they slid beneath the top card. She turned it slowly. Ace of spades. Black, bold, alone on the card, like it was daring her. She held it tight between thumb and index finger, the ink smudging faintly where her sweat met the surface. Her breath came in through her nose, out slow through her teeth. Across the table, the chipped-toothed cowboy raised his brows. Someone chuckled low in their throat. Cards snapped down. Bets made. The round moved fast. She barely followed, only watching hands, eyes. How long each man stared at his own cards before glancing at hers. The red kerchief cowboy folded. The next raised. She mimicked his gesture, pushing 2 chips forward. The wood caught against her nail. She forced her hand to stay steady. When the last card turned, hers was the highest. A flush didn't matter. A bluff didn't matter. The ace sat alone at the top of her hand, and the others tossed their cards aside with shrugs and grunts. The chips clattered toward her like a wave breaking on stone. Her lips twitched, just slightly, then curled. A smile, not wide, not full, but real. She blinked fast and dropped her gaze, brushing her wrist across her mouth like she might wipe the expression away. Too late. She had already laughed, just once. A sharp exhale through her nose, barely audible, but it hung in the air like a crack in glass. From the barn, through the slats of the half-open door, another woman stared. She had not stepped forward, only watched from the shadows as the hand played out. Now she stood frozen, knuckles white around a rusted tin bucket, breath held. The light from the porch caught the corner of her cheek, her jaw locked tight as a vice. She had seen the cards, she had seen the smile, and she had seen the moment the woman forgot, just for a second, where she was. The cowboy pushed the ace back toward her. She didn't take it. It lay there, face up, its black spade bold against the wood grain. The ink had started to lift where her thumb had pressed it. A single fingerprint bloomed faintly at the base of the A. Behind her, someone laughed again. Not her this time, but the sound was easy, rolling, light. She stood, left the chips on the table. Let the ace remain where it was. As she stepped down off the porch, the night air struck her full in the face, cooler than expected. Her hands still shook, faintly. Not from fear, from adrenaline, from touch, from memory. And behind her on the table the card waited. She didn't sleep that night. The barn was too still, too warm. The wool blanket itched against her collarbone, and her skin tingled where the air didn't move. Outside, the crickets had fallen quiet. No wind shifted the loose slats. The cattle in the nearby pen huffed once, then nothing. Her ears strained for sound, any sound, but all she heard was breath. Not hers. The others. 12 bunks, 12 blankets, 12 witnesses. The whisper started low, barely audible, like fabric rubbing skin. "You laughed?" She didn't move. The straw crunched nearby as someone sat up. "You smiled at them," another voice said. This one harsher. "They'll think you've forgotten. They'll think you're weak." The breath in the room thickened, hanging like smoke. Someone coughed. Another rustled their mat, the weight of their stare felt but unseen. She sat up slowly, spine stiff, arms wrapped around her knees. Her hand reached beneath her bedding, fingers finding the soft paper edge worn thin from weeks of hiding. The joker, still creased, still whole. Her thumb traced the fold running down its center. The ink had faded at the bend, a pale scar across the painted grin. Her nails scraped along the edge, catching where the card had frayed. Then, with both hands, she tore it. Not fast, not angry, deliberate. The rip sliced through the silence. One clean tear right down the middle of that grinning face. The halves dangled from her fingers like limp wings. She held them up, let the moonlight see it first, then dropped them. The two pieces fluttered once, then landed beside her knees with a dry whisper. No one spoke, but the message hit harder than a slap. A confession or a threat. A girl 2 bunks over pulled something small from beneath her blouse. She held it tight in both hands, head bowed low, shoulders shaking. Another card. She pressed it to her mouth, eyes squeezed shut, then brought it down, resting it in her lap like a wounded bird. She didn't cry loudly, just wetly. A few drops slid from her cheeks and landed on the floor between her bare feet. Outside, footsteps passed, slow, even, boot soles over gravel. Then a sound, humming, a man's voice, low and untrained, cutting a quiet tune into the dark. A Cowboys song, off-key but whole, notes drawn out with no sense of hurry or shame. It drifted through the barn slats like smoke, curling into the space between bunks, softening the air. No words, just melody. The woman who had torn the card looked toward the window. The humming grew louder for a moment, then faded again as the steps moved farther away. The girl with the hidden card wiped her cheeks. She didn't let go of her card, but she didn't hide it either. The torn joker still sat on the floor, one half face up, the other face down. The exposed eye now looked sideways, tilted, as if winking. She picked up both halves and folded them together, not to fix them, to keep them broken. Then, slowly, she laid down again, her fingers curled around the pieces as if they were something sacred or dangerous. No one else spoke that night, but none of them forgot the sound of that rip. By morning, the barn felt heavier than before, like the air had thickened overnight. The women moved slower through their routines, the scrape of basins and rustle of straw louder in the silence. No one mentioned the torn card. No one looked at the woman who had ripped it, but their glances skirted close, never landing, never speaking, but circling. The porch was quiet when the women passed it on the way to chores. No clatter of chips, no slap of cards, only a table, cleared and wiped, a deck resting in a neat stack at the center. An empty chair on the far side sat askew, slightly turned, as if someone had left in the middle of a sentence. That night, the game returned. Not with the usual rowdy call-outs or bursts of laughter, but with something more measured. The Cowboys played in near silence, movements slower, more deliberate. A lantern hung overhead, its flame flickering shadows across the porch floor. The cards moved with soft flutters, barely audible, and the chips made dull clicks as they were passed from hand to hand. The woman walked toward the porch without being called. She crossed the yard in the open, dust rising behind each step like smoke. The weight of something small pressed against her palm, her own card, worn but intact. The corners were soft, the surface rubbed pale from fingers always folding and unfolding it. The two of clubs. The chair at the end of the table remained empty. She didn't ask. She sat. The chair creaked beneath her weight. A breeze lifted the edge of the deck, and she caught a whiff of something familiar, sweat, leather, and faint tobacco. Her card remained clutched in her hand, thumb brushing the edge until the paper warmed to her skin. One cowboy looked up. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just nodded once. Not a welcome, not permission, acknowledgement. Then he dealt. Her fingers hovered over the stack. She slid the two of clubs forward, laying it face up beside the fresh hand. The black symbols sat firm against the grain of the wood, plain, unremarkable, but hers. The game began. She played slowly, but without hesitation. Watched, matched chips when needed, folded once, stayed in the next. Her eyes stayed sharp, her back straight, her fingers no longer trembling as they flicked the cards from her hand. Across the yard, in the shadow near the barn doors, another figure stood watching, one of the women. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, a ragged blanket thrown around her shoulders. She leaned against the frame, half hidden behind the shadows, only her outline visible beneath the moonlight. Her breath puffed out in small clouds, her jaw tight, unmoving. She didn't step forward, but she didn't leave either. Her gaze locked on the woman at the table, on the card in her hand. The cowboy with the chipped tooth cracked his knuckles and tossed in a small bet. The woman met it. No words exchanged, just motion, just rhythm. The game moved on. The lantern's flame shifted with the wind, casting long shadows across the porch floor. Each card laid down brought a new flicker of light against the players' faces, illuminating calloused fingers and weather-worn knuckles. The two of clubs stayed on the table, untouched. A silent marker, a statement. The woman in the shadows turned once, her head dipping slightly, not in disapproval. Not yet, but with weight, with something heavy enough to carry back into the dark. The morning they were told to line up for repatriation, the sky hung low and yellow, not from sun but from dust. It coated everything, blankets, boots, eyelids, and turned the horizon into a smeared bruise of pale gold and ash. The women stood shoulder to shoulder outside the barn, hands folded in front, as a soldier read names from a clipboard in sharp English consonants. One by one, they stepped forward to receive a bundle, tied in burlap, string knotted tight. Inside, a uniform, folded flat, a tin of hard candy, a photograph of the ranch, taken from the hill above the stables, the bunkhouse just visible behind the chicken coop. And at the bottom, under the socks and soap and stitched handkerchief, a deck of playing cards. The woman untied hers slowly, fingers moving through the cloth like she feared it would vanish. The twine bit into her palm. She dug beneath the paper packet of sweets and lifted the deck. It was standard size, red backing, plastic coated, but every card had been written on, handwritten in thick black ink. King of Bravery, 10 of Mercy, Jack of Peace. She flipped until she reached it. The Joker. It had been torn once, right down the middle, the same way she had ripped hers. The crease still showed, a ridge running vertically across the painted grin. But someone had taped it, neatly. Clear tape pressed flat and aligned so perfectly it was nearly invisible, except for the faint difference in shine, a gloss where the matte card used to be smooth. And beneath the image, scrawled in block letters across the bottom edge, Joker of Joy. Her thumb paused on the word joy. She blinked, then laughed, quietly, not sharp or sudden. Just a breath pushed out with sound. Her chest lifted once and dropped again, and the corner of her mouth curved. She laughed like it wasn't against the rules anymore, like the rules had changed and no one remembered to stop her. No one did. The women around her didn't freeze. They didn't whisper or look away. One near the back, the same one who had once cried silently in the barn, looked down at her own bundle. Her hands moved slowly over the deck in her lap. Then she reached into it and pulled out a card, the Ace of Hearts. It read, "Ace of Grace." She smiled, lips pressed closed, and shook her head. But she stepped forward, stood beside the first woman. Didn't say a word. The dust caught in their eyelashes. A breeze kicked up from the west, lifting strands of hair from their faces and carrying the scent of scorched earth, of mesquite bark, of sun-warmed hay. The joker shifted in her hand, catching the light. That crease, the scar, made the card slightly stiffer than the others. She held it up, let it bend against the wind, the tape flexing but holding. She tucked it into her sleeve, not to hide it, to keep it close. The soldier called the next name. Boots scuffed against dry ground as they moved toward the truck idling in the distance. Its engine popped once, coughed twice, then settled into a low idle. The metal bed shimmered in the heat. Behind them, the ranch stood silent, porch empty, deck cleared. But for the first time since they'd arrived, none of the women looked back. The ship's hull groaned low and constant, a steel sigh that never stopped. The floorboards of the sleeping quarters vibrated with every churn of the ocean, and salt hung in the air like static, sharp, mineral, and alive. Metal beds lined the narrow corridor in 2 rows, each bunk stacked and bolted tight. Above, the single overhead bulb flickered with the rhythm of the waves, casting soft shadows over the woman's lap. She pulled out the deck. The edges were no longer crisp. The corners had curled, just slightly, softened by oil from hands and heat from the Texas sun. The red backing had faded into a rust-colored haze, the original gloss dulled into something more like leather, warm, used, known. She ran her thumb along the side and tapped the edge against her knee, the cards clicking in a tight, clean pack. She shuffled once, then again. The sound was smooth, paper gliding over paper, then snapping into place with a gentle slap. No hesitation in her fingers, no tremble in the wrist. The cards fanned with even spacing, her hands steady as the ship beneath her swayed. Across from her, a younger girl sat cross-legged on the bunk, watching. Her uniform was still too large, wrists lost in sleeves, collar sagging at the neck, but her eyes were sharp, locked onto the deck like it held answers. The woman dealt 5 cards in a straight row between them. The Queen of Spades, the 10 of Diamonds, the Ace of Clubs, the Jack of Hearts, and the Joker. That same Joker, taped and creased, the seam still visible where it had been torn and mended. She picked it up and turned it in her fingers, feeling the ridges of the tape, now yellowed slightly at the edges. Its corners were thumb-soft, edges nicked. It was the card that had been watched, feared, hidden, destroyed, and returned. She reached into the satchel beside her and pulled out a pencil stub. Snapping the deck's box open, she flattened the joker on the cardboard flap and, with the pencil pressed firm, wrote slowly across the bottom. "This card broke first, so I didn't have to." The younger girl said nothing. She only watched the motion, the way the pencil left thick gray grooves on the white margin. When the writing was done, the woman placed the joker back into the deck, shuffled again, then handed the stack over. "Your turn," she said. The girl hesitated, then reached out with both hands, carefully cupping the cards as if they might slip away. Her palms were damp. The top card stuck slightly before sliding free. They played. Simple rounds at first. Pair, high card, fold. The woman explained the rules with gestures, finger taps, eyebrow tilts, a wave to signal when to hold. Laughter didn't fill the air. Not yet, but silence didn't stretch either. The rhythm of the game filled the space, a new language carved out between them. Outside the porthole, the sea had turned from deep blue to silver. The shoreline was coming into view. Faint, still far, but unmistakable. The jagged outline of cliffs. Smoke rising from somewhere inland. Japan. The girl looked out, cards still in hand. The woman did not. She shuffled again, dealt a fresh hand. The cards landed clean. 5 more laid down. No fanfare, no ceremony, just the same flick of wrist that had started everything weeks ago, on a porch in Texas beneath a lantern with laughter held behind teeth. The game didn't stop when the war did. It just changed tables. If this story moved you, like the video and tell us in the comments where are you watching from.